Today, I want to tell you a story about a person who sat down at their computer to write a post on Reddit and ended up taking down one of the most violent and horrific troubled teen schools as a result. This is Heart Starts Pounding. Welcome to our Rogue Detecting Society headquarters. If you like mysterious disappearances, the true stories behind urban legends, and other dark deep dives like this one, you're in the right place. You're just like me. We upload once a week, so make sure you subscribe to this channel so you don't miss an upload.
It's when your heart starts pounding.
In November of 2010, a post popped up on Reddit that now lives in infamy. It was posted in the subreddit r/self by a user, Jesus is my hero, who has since deleted their account. And the title just read, quote, "Even skimming this post once will blow your mind. Most probably think that it's made up, but you would be dead wrong." Jesus went on to explain that he was sent to a place known as the Elan School in 1998 when he was just 16 years old. He said the school was still open to this very day, and there were still kids as young as 13 years old going there. But it was not at all what it seemed. In fact, the post says, it was basically state-sanctioned torture. Now, the school was advertised as a place where, quote, troubled students could be sent by their parents to receive an education and behavioral support. A way to gently straighten out your child so they could thrive in society, essentially. But this Reddit post said that was not the case. Here's some of what they wrote. They said that the, quote, school accepted anyone and then held them as long as they possibly could, depending on the age of the child. If you were sent at 14 years old, as many were, you may have been looking at 3 to 4 years locked inside. This is because the Elan School collects $50,000 a year per child, either from the child's state, school, or parents. And of course, money was the only motivation of the staff and directors. These were the people in charge of your, quote, progress in the program. At Elan School, we were forced to participate in staff-organized fight clubs, none of which were fair. All were designed to humiliate one child who would be put up against at least 3 others. So even the children who followed the rules were forced to fight in the name of good. Children who tried to rebel or be free-thinking were thrown in an isolation room where they had to stay for months at a time. They had to sleep at night on a dirty mattress on the floor of the isolation room. The mattress was brought to them at midnight, and they were woken up at around 7 a.m. All outgoing letters to parents were screened, many of us having to write many different drafts until they were accepted. All phone calls to our parents were monitored. We were allowed about 15 minutes a week, and the person who monitored the call would have their hand hovering over the hang-up button as a constant reminder of our reality. We were not allowed to write or receive letters until we earned the right, and this could take 8 months or more. When someone found out where I was and wrote me, my unopened letters were ripped up in front of me as motivation to move up in the program. I feel like I'm beginning to write too much, and I do not want to overwhelm anyone who made it this far, because most of the bullet points honestly require further explanation to give the full impact of what Elan truly was. The most important thing that anyone can do is be aware of this place and make sure that nobody you know ever gets sent there for any reason. If you are a parent, then do not send your child there. If you know someone who is there now, then beg the parents to do more research. The amount of suicides and tragic deaths of former Elan students is a reason enough to take this post seriously. Please. The post also explained that the, quote, school part of this school was essentially nothing. Kids would do school from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m., and most of their teachers were not actual teachers. They were just other students who had graduated from the school, but they ended their post with this powerful message. Quote, "This place only still exists because so many people believe that it doesn't or that it can't. I believe that the internet is our #1 tool for exposing these horrid blind spots for what they are. Help me, Reddit." Now, I'm not sure what the poster was expecting to happen when they sat down at their laptop and wrote this anonymous post. Elan School had been around since 1970. Thousands of kids had been sent there, and some commenters on the post were really skeptical at first. Like, if this was really going on, wouldn't they have heard something about it by this point? How could this possibly be legal? Well, what this poster maybe didn't know is that journalists had been trying to expose Elan School for decades, but to no avail. No matter what they published, parents still sent their teenagers to this place, throwing them into the belly of the beast and watching as they emerged just shells of themselves. No, none of the journalists were able to do what this Reddit post was about to. Now, I think people these days are a bit more familiar with the, quote, troubled teen industry than ever before. Paris Hilton made a documentary about her time at one of these schools, and the Netflix show Wayward was a fictionalized version based on a true story. I personally hate the phrase troubled teen because what does troubled even mean? Students sent to these programs have everything from criminal records to undiagnosed ADHD. The industry has become a way to profit off of minors that don't neatly and quietly fit into society. But there is a long and sordid history to these places. Now, the Elan School, which this poster wrote about, specifically was located in Maine. It sat on 33 acres of woods on the shore of Upper Range Pond in a town called Poland, about 30 miles north of Portland. The main building had been a hunting lodge once, and ironically, being a respite for men while they were tracking and killing local wildlife might have been the least morbid thing about this place. In 1970, a man named Joe Ricci bought the building, and to understand how Elan came to be, you have to understand who Joe Ricci was, because it's his lifeblood that was pumped into the school. In 1963, Joe Ricci was 18 years old, growing up in a working class town outside of New York City, and he had been using heroin for years. That spring, he and some friends got caught robbing a U.S. Postal Service mail truck. The judge gave Joe a choice. He could spend up to 7 years in prison, or he could go to rehab. And that's how he wound up at a place in Connecticut called Daytop Village. Daytop was something new at the time. It was a therapeutic community for drug addicts. It was the first generation of a movement that thought addicts could only be saved by being broken first. Daytop was actually modeled on a Santa Monica program called Synanon, which had started in 1958 and was, to put it mildly, a cult. Synanon had this thing that they called, quote, the game. I think we talked about it actually when Amanda Montell and I did the Reddit episode about cult stories, but just a quick reminder, for the game, you would sit in a circle with other addicts and the group would essentially verbally attack you. They would find your weakest point, childhood trauma or body image, anything, and they would just hammer into it for hours, sometimes for days. I mean, imagine someone finding out something you're horribly sensitive about, like the death of a loved one, and then a group of people screaming at you that it was your fault. That was the game. The theory was that if they tore you all the way down, you would stop using drugs or alcohol because there would be nothing left of the old you to feed the addiction. Studies later found that about 10 to 15% of people who went through this program actually did get sober, but those people might have also eventually gotten sober on their own. There's no way to tell because the rest of the people that went through this program actually got worse. Some came out completely unable to function, but the ones who did get sober at Synanon tended to become evangelists about the program. And Joe Ricci was one of those people who came out sober. He left Daytop a very firm believer of the way that it worked. And in 1971, the federal government got into the same business. They gave a grant to a Florida program called The Seed, which took Synanon's methods and then applied them to teenagers specifically. And these were even teenagers that hadn't actually used drugs. They were just kids whose parents suspected that they might have used drugs. And I mean, I'm sorry, but that is so many teenagers. If the bar is just teens whose parents thought they used drugs, I feel like 75% of my friend group would have been sent to The Seed. By 1974, Congress had gotten word that the program was really, really intense, so they did an investigation. And the committee found that The Seed used methods, quote, similar to the highly refined brainwashing techniques employed by the North Koreans. And then they let this program keep going after that. The Seed got rebranded as Straight Incorporated, which Nancy Reagan would later declare her favorite anti-drug program. And this closed in 1993, but it did spawn a whole new generation of successors that are still open today. And this is the very messed up world that Elan School was born into. So, in 1970, Joe Ricci, a rehab evangelist with no formal education and no clinical training, partnered with a Boston psychiatrist named Dr. Gerald Davidson and an investor named David Goldberg, who put up all the money for this. And the three of them together opened Elan in Poland, Maine. And this did start as a treatment program for adults with drug addiction issues. But within a few years, they pivoted because they saw that there was only a small pool of heroin addicts that were willing to try out the program. But there were a lot of rich families that had teenagers who they thought were using drugs, or who had behavioral issues, or, like I mentioned earlier, undiagnosed ADHD, autism, you name it. So Elan rebranded as a, quote, therapeutic boarding school for adolescents. Kids with addiction issues, kids with behavioral issues, kids whose parents felt like they had run out of options. And the price at its peak was $54,960 a year for a 2-year program, sometimes longer, depending. And on the outside, this looked like a boarding school in the beautiful woods of Maine. But on the inside, it was the type of horror show that still haunts thousands of former students to this day. This episode is brought to you by Solace Health. I have been booking lots of doctor's appointments lately, and it can be such a headache. You can spend hours on hold with insurance. You can be bounced between doctors who clearly aren't talking to each other. I mean, I see it in my life now, and I have a grandmother with Alzheimer's, and it's hard for her to go to the doctor and advocate for herself. Having a Solace advocate would be such a game changer. Solace connects you with dedicated healthcare advocates, registered nurses, and healthcare pros averaging 16 years of experience who do the work that usually falls on you. A Solace advocate can find the right doctors and schedule your appointments, fight denied insurance claims, and get your care approved. And they can also make sure your doctors are actually in sync so nothing falls through the cracks. Studies show that 98% of patients feel more in control of their care after working with an advocate. You can go to solacehealth.com to see if you qualify. It takes about 2 minutes and it's covered by insurance. That's solacehealth.com. Must be 18 or older. Advocates do not provide medical or legal advice. This episode is brought to you by Minky Couture. I run cold. Maybe you guys can relate to me. Always. Even in the summer, I will have a blanket on my lap if I'm on the couch. And lately, I feel like I'm up at all hours needing something cozy around me. So when Minky Couture sent me their famous hug blanket, I understood immediately why they called themselves the original blanket company. This thing literally hugs you back. It's double-sided, stretchy, and honestly one of the softest blankets I've ever felt. They also have a lot of colors and fun patterns as well. Minky Couture is a female-owned company that donates over 100,000 mini Minkies to NICUs every year through their Heart of Minky initiative, which, as a new mom, hits me right in the heart. It really is the best blanket ever. Even my baby loves it. He loves to be wrapped up in it for his last nap of the day. Follow them on Instagram at Minky Couture for deals and updates. You can also visit minkycouture.com and use code HSP at checkout for 50% off all full-priced blankets. That's a great deal. That's minkycouture.com. Use code HSP for 50% off all full-price blankets. This episode is brought to you by Kachava. I typically thrive on a routine, and the second I'm out of my house for more than a day, all of that starts to fall apart, which is why I'm very excited that Kachava just launched travel packs. You literally just throw a pack or two in your bag on the way out of the door, and you've got your all-in-one nutrition handled wherever you go. One packet gives you plant-based protein, fiber, vitamins, greens, probiotics, all with no fillers, no artificial flavors, colors, or sweeteners. It's clean, it's simple, and it actually tastes good, which is why I feel like I shouldn't be surprised anymore, but here we are. I love Kachava. I've been drinking Kachava for over a year now, and lately I feel like my life has just been more hectic, and I'm often forgetting to eat, so I love that they now have these travel packs. They've got 6 flavors, including my favorite vanilla, but they also have chocolate and coconut acai, and you can try them completely risk-free with their Love It guarantee. Take your daily ritual with you. Go to Kachava.com and use code HSP for 15% off your first order. That's Kachava, KACHAVA.com, code HSP. If you were a teenager being sent to Elan, you usually didn't get told you were going. You would go to bed in your own room one night, and then you would wake up at 3 a.m. to 2 strangers standing over you. They were called transporters, sometimes called gooners. I know that word means something totally different these days. Do not share this episode with your 12-year-old son. But the Gooners' whole job was to wake up other people's children, restrain them if they had to, and get them into a van by any means necessary, and then drive them up to Maine. Your parents knew that this was going to happen. They were the ones who had hired these strangers to throw you in the van. You would then be processed at the school the next day, and that's really when the horrors would start. They would take your clothes, they made you shower in front of staff, not always staff of the same gender either. They took whatever was in your pockets, your bag, your wallet, and they gave you a uniform. By the end of the first day, you didn't have a single thing that was yours anymore. Then you walked into your house, and at Elan, house meant a unit of about 55 other kids who lived together, and that's when you got your first look of daily life there. Now, the first thing you would notice is that almost no one looks like staff. It was often hard to find the adult in the room. The students ran everything. The students at Elan were divided into a hierarchy. At the bottom was a position they called shot down. This role had no privileges. They just scrubbed floors all day. And above that was a series of crews like service, kitchen, communications, business, office. At the top were the expediters, and that was the security team. Expediters were in charge of watching the other students. They patrolled in zones. They counted everyone every 10 minutes all day, every day, and also every night while you were sleeping. An expediter would come into your dorm room with a flashlight and lift the sheets off of you. And they did this every 10 minutes throughout the night. The reason was so that you couldn't hide clothes in your bed and escape. Every word that you wrote was read before it left the school. Every phone call you had was monitored. You had 4 minutes to shower, and you had to ask permission to talk to other students. You couldn't look out of a window. You couldn't write anything down without permission. You couldn't wear dark clothes because that's what kids who tried to escape would wear. So the school took all of the dark clothes that you owned. About 200 infractions were booked against students every day, and booked meant that another student had wrote down what you'd done, like if you had talked out loud or if you had looked at the wrong person or maybe smiled at the wrong moment, and that person turned it in to the staff. After that, a dealing crew would convene, and you would stand in front of 3 older students who would yell at you in a kind of ritual unison about everything you had done wrong. And then you would be assigned your punishment. For some infractions, the punishment was this thing they would do called a general meeting. A general meeting started with someone yelling, "House in the dining room." Then everyone would drop what they were doing and run into a single room. They would put this broomstick on the floor as a line, and the kid being punished would stand on one side of the line and everyone else would be on the other. Then a staff member would yell, "Get your feelings off." And then everyone would rush forward in 5 or 6 at a time and scream into this student's face. Anything, insults, profanity, whatever they could think of. They would sometimes spit on this person, and they would keep going until everyone in that house had a turn. Sometimes this lasted an hour. Sometimes it would happen twice in one day. And you had no choice but to participate on either side. This was not just a spectator sport. In the 1970s, a student named Michael Wiggins was put through one of these general meetings once, and the leader told him to admit that he was a coward and a chicken. Now, he didn't want to do that, so he did say no, but apparently that was the wrong answer, because the leader then picked up a paddle and beat Michael with it until he was bleeding. And then Michael was forced to put on a chicken suit. He said as he was wearing this suit, there was blood pouring down his legs, and it was humiliating and incredibly painful. But that was what was expected at these meetings. And general meetings weren't even the most embarrassing or violent part of Elan. No, that was something known as the ring. The ring was essentially a boxing match. Whoever was being punished would put on boxing gloves and face a guard. The other students would form a circle around them, and inside of that circle, another student would step in to fight. Each round, the person being punished would have to fight a new student, so it was impossible to win. No one had enough energy to beat every single student at the school. And the ring kept going until the kid being punished gave up, and usually by that point, they were just beaten into a bloody pulp and physically could not continue. If the student being punished couldn't stand anymore, other students would hold them up so they could keep being punched. Now, there was also this one punishment called the corner, and the corner was a chair that faced a wall, and you would just have to sit in it all day. You couldn't talk, you couldn't read, you couldn't listen to music, and another student sat next to you to make sure you didn't move. Now, one former student told a Maine newspaper in 2002 that he watched a girl stay in the corner for 57 days. Another former student described being someone in the corner for so long that their leg muscles started atrophying. A staff had to walk the kid around the room a couple times a day so he wouldn't lose the ability to walk. Now, in 1980, an NBC News reporter named Robert Rogers did a segment on Elan. Word had been spreading around about the horrors of the school, and it was time someone did something about it. Joe Ricci sat down on camera for an interview, and he admitted on tape to corporal punishment being used at Elan. He explained that students administered it to each other, but here's the thing. When it's teenagers that have been labeled as troubled that are being abused, no one really cares. That interview was in 1980, and when our Reddit poster sat down to write his testimony in 2010, Elan was still open. But more people started flooding that Reddit thread with their own horrible stories of being inside of the school, of being in a general meeting, of being in the ring, of having to sit in that chair. And some of the things they wrote were even more shocking than what I've told you just now. Like one poster who wrote, quote, "One girl I was close with died horribly when she ran away. When the director of my house told us of her death, she pointed to me and went off on how I would never be as good as this girl. I was worthless. I was 16. She was so much prettier, charismatic, etc. than I. Why her and not me? I am a waste of bed space, etc., etc." Now, I believe that this friend that this poster was speaking about was Dawn Birnbaum, who was a 17-year-old girl that decided on March 22nd, 1993, that she was going to run away from the program. Dawn's body tragically was found a few days later in a snowbank in Pennsylvania. She had been sexually assaulted, strangled, and then her body was dumped in Pennsylvania not long after she had tried to escape. Male DNA that was found at the scene tied the crime to James Cruz Jr., who was an Ohio trucking company driver who was later arrested for the crime. But the school didn't close after Dawn's death, and it didn't close after the interview in 1980 either. If it had, then a 15-year-old student wouldn't have died just 2 years after that interview. Phil Williams was from Auburn, Maine. He was 15 years old in December of 1982. His sister Pam was 12 at the time. In their childhood, their father had attacked their mom viciously with a pipe. That left their father in prison and their mother unresponsive in a nursing home for the rest of her life. Phil and Pam had been wards of the state in Maine for years. They had been moved from foster home to foster home. Phil had run into trouble with the law somewhere along the way. The specifics aren't in the public record, but after that, the state sent him to Elan School to straighten him out. On December 27th, Phil told one of the staff at Elan that he had a headache. Now, this was something that was well known and documented about Phil. He suffered from migraines. It was also believed that his bouts of aggression were tied to these migraines because they usually coincided with one another. But even though these migraines were in part the reason for the aggression that landed Phil in Elan, on December 27th, when he told staff that he was getting one, they didn't believe him. And Elan had a way of dealing with kids who claimed to be in pain. The staff thought that this was manipulation. So as a punishment for complaining, they ordered Phil into the ring. Other students at Elan that day saw what happened next, and this is what they described. Phil was put in the boxing ring, surrounded by the rest of the house, and made to fight. New opponents stepped in every round. The fighting went on and on and on, and at some point, Phil collapsed. Students watched as he turned blue and started convulsing on the floor. Eventually, staff carried him away, and he was pronounced dead the next day. The school told his family that it was a sudden aneurysm that caused this. They said that there was nothing anyone could have done, and there was no investigation any further into this. There was no autopsy beyond what was needed to write down the words "probable brain aneurysm" on the death certificate, and then the school arranged for his funeral. Phil was buried in an unmarked grave, and none of his friends were allowed to attend. Elan didn't allow students to go to each other's funerals as a rule. But there was one exception to this. There was a young woman who was sent to Elan from Florida who had been Phil's unofficial girlfriend at the school. Now, Elan had banned any kind of relationship between students, but she and Phil had managed to be something to each other anyways, and Elan did let her go to the funeral. She would try to tell the staff at the school 3 decades later what she had seen the day before Phil died. She corroborated the witness accounts of the ring. She cried through the entire interview that she gave. And then, 2 weeks before Maine State Police could take her formal statement on the record, she died suddenly. She was never able to give her testimony. Phil's sister Pam was 12 when she was at his funeral. She was in foster care, living separately from her brother, and she was told that her brother had died of a freak medical event. She said that at her brother's funeral, she tried to crawl into his grave to stay with him, and she remembered having to be forcefully removed from the cemetery. But Pam never questioned the story that the school had told her about her brother's death. She didn't know what was actually happening inside those walls, so she had no reason to. And honestly, most people didn't know about what was going on at Elan, or they did know and just didn't care, because over the years, there would be countless attempts to publicize the horrors of that school, and none were taken seriously. This episode is sponsored by Liquid IV. Now that summer is here, I feel like I'm constantly on the move between work and trying to actually enjoy the weather. Before, I was not drinking nearly enough water, but Liquid IV has been saving me because just 1 stick and 16 ounces of water hydrates faster than water alone. It's powered by Live Hydroscience, an optimized ratio of electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients. I keep a few hydration multiplier sticks in my bag at all times. There's a lot of really fun flavors for summer, like the cotton candy flavor honestly feels like a little summer treat. It delivers longer lasting hydration than water alone. And right now, you can get 20% off your first order with code HSP at checkout. Like me, you can keep one on you at all times. One in the car, one in your bag, one right by your bed. I love Liquid IV. Stay hydrated while you're on the go this summer with Liquid IV. Tear, pour, live more. Go to liquidiv.com and get 20% off your first purchase with code HSP at checkout. That's 20% off your first purchase with code HSP at liquidiv.com. This episode is brought to you by OG. Have you ever put on what you thought was a great face of makeup in the morning and by 2 p.m. it just looks way too heavy? Like it's sitting on top of your skin instead of being a part of it. That is what led me to OG, a certified organic beauty brand that performs like luxury makeup. Their Crystal Contour collection is nearly 90% skincare ingredients. Think green coffee oil, elderberry extract, cold pressed jojoba, ingredients that actually nourish your skin while giving you color and glow. Also, they're NSF certified organic, which is way more rigorous than a clean beauty label. This system is 3 sticks. You have copper for warmth, rose quartz for flush, and opal for highlight. And I will say this Crystal Contour collection has quickly become one of my go-to staples. I love that it's mostly skincare products. If you're ready to raise your beauty standards, OG's got you covered. Go to OG.com/HSP and use code HSP for 20% off. That's OGEE.com/HSP and enter code HSP to get 20% off. This episode is brought to you by Alma. I'm a big believer in therapy, but finding the right therapist can feel like its own obstacle. Honestly, it can be the thing that keeps you from getting help in the first place. I remember not knowing where to start and feeling so overwhelmed by the whole process. Who takes my insurance? Who's going to be the right fit? And what is this actually going to cost me? Those obstacles usually turn people away from getting help. Well, that's why I want to tell you about Alma. Alma has a network of over 26,000 therapists nationwide, and 98% of them accept insurance. You can browse their directory without even making an account and use filters to find someone who actually fits your needs. Clients with insurance pay $20 on average, and most people find their match on the first try. Seriously, there is nothing worse than feeling so overwhelmed by something that you stop before you even really get started. And that's especially when it comes to mental health. You deserve to find help and to not be exhausted by the process. Get started now at helloalma.com/heartstarts. That's helloalma.com/HEARTSTARTS. In the summer of 1975, the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services pulled 11 children out of Elan, accusing the school of physical and mental abuse. Joe Ricci called it slander and a political hoax. The state of Maine did its own investigation and found nothing. 3 of the 11 children ended up back at Elan within the year. And after that, the school stayed open. Corrections magazine published an expose in March of 1979 titled, "Elan, Does its bizarre regimen transform troubled youths or abuse them?" That same year, a congressional subcommittee on human resources had a hearing called Oversight on Scared Straight, and Elan was discussed by name, but the school stayed open after that. In 1983, a documentary called Children of Darkness aired on PBS. Filmmakers had been allowed inside Elan, and they captured footage that the school was not expecting them to get, including 2 boys living in a dumpster outside of the facility with another boy posed as their guard. If the boys in the dumpster tried to escape, the narrator explained, the guard would be put inside instead. There was also a boy that was filmed in a pink bunny suit with shackles around his ankles. He had apparently tried to run away. Even after this aired, the school stayed open. Then, in 2000, the magazine Details published a long piece by a journalist named Kevin Gray calling Elan, quote, among the most controversial of the nation's residential therapeutic communities. It described the abuses and practices in detail, and the school still stayed open. Then in 2001, Joe Ricci died of lung cancer, and his widow, Sharon Terry, took over. In 2007, the journalist Maya Zalovitz published a feature in Mother Jones called The Cult That Spawned the Tough Love Teen Industry. And that same year, the New York State Education Department, which had been paying tuition for some of its kids to attend Elan, sent the school a letter. The state alleged that students at Elan were being physically restrained by other students and being deprived of sleep. The state threatened to stop paying the school, and Elan's lawyer responded. And after that, the school still stayed open. There's reasons, though, that the school kept staying open and didn't close. And it's a tale as old as time. Money at the expense of children. Elan had a director of governmental relations, this man named Bill Diamond, who happened to be a Maine state politician. Joe Ricci, while he was alive, owned the largest harness racing track in Maine, Scarborough Downs, and twice he ran for governor. Elan was just not a school that the state of Maine particularly wanted to close, so they didn't close it. But there was another reason, too, one that's not really talked about as much. For 30 years, every story about Elan came through someone else. It was through a journalist reporting or through a state investigator's report. Sometimes it was through a court witness's testimony in someone else's trial. The survivors themselves, the actual students who had been there, almost never got to tell their own stories on their own terms to the people who actually needed to hear them. But that started to change slowly in the mid-2000s. With the introduction of the internet, people were able to connect who previously weren't able to. A small group of former students started finding each other online. Mark Babbitt's from Chicago, who had been sent to Elan as a ward of the state of Illinois back in the 70s, a woman named Sharon McCarthy in Illinois who said that she had been sexually assaulted on a school outing while she was at Elan in 1984. There was Matt Hoffman in Virginia who had been at Elan from 1974 to 1976. And there was a New York writer who went by Kernochin. Around 2008, McCarthy started a Facebook group called the Elan Survivors Group. By 2010, it had a few hundred members. The group then built a website. They started writing blog posts. They posted in obscure forums where almost no one read them. For 2 or 3 years, they organized in plain sight, and almost nothing came of it. But then, in November of 2010, that post showed up on Reddit, and it threw gasoline on the grassroots online movement that the others were starting. And now, the stories being told about Elan were being told in raw, first-person, unedited form on a platform where you could just keep scrolling and hear more. After that first post, other former Elan students started showing up in the replies, and then more, and even more after that. And by the end of the first week, the thread had hundreds of comments. Some of them were from people who had been trying to talk about Elan since the 80s. They had written letters, they had called reporters, they had posted in those obscure forums in the early 2000s that nobody read. And now, suddenly, they were all in one place. All of these people were comparing notes, naming the same staff members, describing the same rings, the same corner, those same general meetings. And a lot of them used the same phrase that I kept saying over and over again as I was going through this thread, but they would all say, quote, "I thought I was the only one." The pre-existing core organizers that I talked about earlier, Babbitts, McCarthy, Hoffman, and Kernochin, they all saw what was happening and they threw their weight behind it. The Elan Survivors group on Facebook went from a few hundred members to several hundred more in a matter of months. Mark Babbitts drove out to the abandoned Parsonfield campus, which was the maximum security wing that Elan had stopped using in the 80s, and he photographed the basement. In there, he found a cell, like a literal locked cell, with a coat hook on the wall and a deadbolt installed from the inside, designed to keep the occupant from escaping. He took this picture of graffiti that was scrawled on the wall of an isolation room on the top floor, and it read, quote, "Elan don't like people to have families, so they send them to group homes and keep them here for 3 years." A woman named Mary O'Brien posted drawings that she had made of her experiences inside of Elan, pictures of the general meetings and the ring, and these started spreading all around the network. And the website that the survivors had built, Elan School's record of atrocities, started climbing in the Google rankings. By early 2011, if you were a parent Googling Elan School because you wanted to send your kid there, the first thing you saw wasn't the school's marketing brochure anymore. It was survivor testimony. For 41 years, Elan had controlled what parents saw. They held onto the facade that this was a therapeutic school, and they worked really hard to make sure that these real stories from insiders did not get out. But the internet finally democratized this storytelling, and Reddit provided a place for all of the stories to be told at once on one big thread. The more voices that were added to this thread, the more viral it went and the higher it climbed on Google rankings. And within a few months, parents were pulling their children from the school. On March 23rd, 2011, that's less than 5 months after the original post, Sharon Terry, who was the current director of Elan, sat down to write a letter. The letter went to the Lewiston Sun-Journal, the local newspaper that had been covering Elan for 40 years, and it announced that the school was going to be closing on April 1st. In this letter, she didn't admit to anything. Actually, she denied everything. The letter described the survivor campaign as, quote, "harsh and false attacks spread over the internet with the avowed purpose of forcing the school to close." And specifically, it named an accuser. Sharon Terry's letter pointed directly at the original Reddit user, a person who she had never met, whose real name she did not even know, and she identified them as being the person whose testimony Elan had been unable to survive. For the first time in the school's history, the institution was acknowledging on the record that one survivor's voice had broken something it had spent 4 decades protecting. She announced that the school was closing because enrollment had declined so much due to people seeing the truth of the school. There was no celebration in any state office in Augusta when this happened. There was no statement from the governor. There was no criminal charge against anyone involved. And there was no acknowledgement of the students who had died there, like Phil Williams or Don Birnbaum. There was no formal acknowledgement that anything bad had happened there at all. The school just silently closed its doors, and the buildings then sat there, empty for 13 years. That is until 2024, when it started burning down. On November 17th, 2024, a building on the old Elan campus caught fire. It burned to the ground. On March 1st, 2025, another fire burned another building down. And on March 7th, 2025, 6 days later, a third fire burned another building to the ground. The Maine State Fire Marshal's Office announced that all 3 of these fires were intentionally set by teen boys. And maybe there is something a little poetic about a new generation of teen boys burning down a school that destroyed the teenagers of their parents' generation. But this did mark a final chapter of the school. Pam Newell, whose brother Phil died inside of the school, was also partially able to close that chapter of her life. She eventually did learn what truly happened to Phil after survivor Mark Babbitts told her about it in 2016. That year, she was also able to raise enough money to finally get her brother a headstone. The closure of the school is really a suture on an otherwise open and unhealing wound, though. That same year, Mark Babbitts tried to put together a $50 million civil suit, something to pay the victims back for what had been stolen from them. Sure, the school was closed, but the pain would linger for the rest of the victims' lives. He went to the Maine State Police with witness statements and a copy of Phil Williams' death certificate. And sadly, the Attorney General's office found that there was, quote, insufficient evidence and the case was ultimately closed. The troubled teen industry is still around, and it's still claiming lives. Sometimes it looks like a boarding school, but other times it looks like a wilderness camp. In one of my earliest episodes of Heart Starts Pounding, actually, I interviewed a young woman who had been in the troubled teen industry for almost 4 years. I highly recommend you listen to her story in her own words in that episode. My jaw was on the floor the entire time we were speaking. The internet can be a force for good, but there is a long, long way to go when it comes to this industry. And if you're interested in helping, you can look into programs like Breaking Code Silence for more resources. And hopefully, at the end of all of this, more victims can feel empowered to come forward, because really, that's where the change comes from. Victims being able to tell their stories in their own words, and for us to feel the impact of that. That is all I have for you today. This was a wild episode to get into. Have you guys been affected by the troubled teen industry? You or any of your loved ones ever been sent there? Please let me know in the comments wherever you listen to episodes. I'm always interested in hearing your stories. You can join me here next week for another episode. And until then, stay curious. Ooh. Heart Starts Pounding is written and produced by me, Kaelyn Moore. Heart Starts Pounding is also produced by Matt Brown. Our associate producer is Juno Hobbs. Sound design and mix by Red Room Creative. Special thanks to Travis Dunlap, Grayson Jernigan, and the team at WME. Have a heart-pounding story or a case request? You can submit on the forum on our site, heartstartspounding.com.